Hello, my name is Dee Dee Jones, and I am a Senior Program Specialist in the Department of Agriculture Economics up in Amarillo. And what I'd like to visit with y'all today about is financial accounting for farmers and ranchers. This presentation will be broke up into two sections. First, we will cover the goals of financial accounting and some common computerized accounting programs, primarily focusing on QuickBooks. And then we'll wrap up with a basic accounting overview to provide you some definitions that you'll need to know before we can move forward. The second section, we're going to focus on some of the unique features of QuickBooks that I find are the most useful for farmers and ranchers. That includes the class system, planning and budgeting, and payroll. So what should producer goals for financial accounting be? I've worked with a lot of farmers and ranchers over the years, and I've never met a single one that loves staying home and doing their books. It's just not an enjoyable process, but it's a very important component to farming and ranching because you need to have good financial statements in order to have a good relationship with your banker and get your operating notes renewed and get equipment and land notes. So some of the goals are just to develop good balance sheet and profit and loss or income statements and overall become a better manager. So what are some of the advantages of QuickBooks? The QuickBooks website will tell you it's very easy to use. I've been teaching this class live for about 18 years, and I've met a whole lot of farmers and ranchers that would probably argue otherwise. But honestly, once you understand some of the basic commands, it's a relatively user-friendly program. Accountants prefer it because of the double entry feature allows you to create a good balance sheet. It also has both cash and accrual-based systems. And with the accrual-based systems, which we'll discuss more later, you're able to manage an accounts payable and accounts receivable and create things like invoicing and billing statements. I like QuickBooks report features. You can produce some really good reports that you bring to your banker or your accountant, and they're relatively easy to reconcile. And then finally, the enterprise accounting you can do through the class system, and knowing exactly where your income and expenses are going can make a big difference on your bottom line. That being said, there are some disadvantages in QuickBooks. Accounting for certain assets is difficult due to poor design and a lack of certain depreciation features. One thing that comes to mind is that the QuickBooks inventory system does not always work that well for agriculture operations. It can work for livestock purchase for resale. An example would be if you went out and bought 400-pound stockers, kept them for a few months, turned around and sold them as 700 to 800-pound stockers. QuickBooks inventory works okay for that. The system does not work well for raised crops and livestock, such as cotton or corn or cow-calf operations. This financial management program has a hard time understanding how things appear out of thin air. You don't buy cotton, it just appears one day on your balance sheet because you raised it, in the same way with calves. And it just has a hard time accurately accounting for that. And then finally, switching between cash and accrual-based financial statements is not a perfect transition. And I'll go into an example on this situation here in a minute. So why not Quicken instead? I get calls every year from producers that are using Quicken right now, and they want to know if it's worth their time and effort to switch over to QuickBooks. And the answer is it really just depends on your type of business. Quicken is more for personal, not really for a total business type accounting program. The reason is that it's focused more on cash flow, so it's hard to produce a balance sheet. Also, the fact that it's not accrual based, you can't line up income and expenses. QuickBooks does have a better payroll feature. And when you're starting out, setting up QuickBooks is really just as easy as setting up Quicken, and it's probably going to benefit you more in the long term. If you are using Quicken right now, QuickBooks does allow for an easy conversion over. Basically, you just go to your File and Utilities menu, and you can convert it directly from Quicken. And what will happen is if you use classes in Quicken, they will automatically become classes in QuickBooks, and all your Quicken categories will become QuickBooks accounts. Once you convert it over, those two programs don't talk anymore, but it is a pretty easy transition to roll it up. So what about QuickBooks Online? This is a relatively new version of QuickBooks that hasn't been around just real long. And like any other program, it has some pros and cons. Some of the pros are it can be accessed from any location on multiple devices. There's easy information sharing between partners and accountants and anybody else you want to share your books with. It has automatic updates and data backup and infinite storage. And then service-based businesses do work pretty well on this platform. From an agriculture standpoint, a business that I think of that uses QuickBooks Online and they're very happy with it is a composting operation up in Dumas. They have QuickBooks Online because they want to be able to pull up QuickBooks on their iPad while they're in the middle of a field working with a customer, create an invoice, and then email it to them directly. So it's a service-based business. QuickBooks Online works pretty well for that. It also has some cons or disadvantages. Basically, like I said, QuickBooks Online is made to work on iPads or Galaxies or anything like that. It is an app, and so it's got a very different look and a different way of having to navigate through the program. Because it's more of an app versus a desktop accounting program, it lacks some of the desktop features. You do have reduced control over your data, and it requires reliable, fast internet access. If you live out in the middle of nowhere and your internet can be sketchy sometimes, when your internet goes down, you can't get to your data until you get it back up again. I have not worked with online payroll directly, but the accountants that I talked to aren't real fond of it. They said it has some glitches and the desktop version is better. There is a big learning curve if you've used desktop for a lot of years. I had to learn it 2 years ago. It's not harder, it's just very, very different. And then to me, a big disadvantage is if you have multiple companies, they're going to charge you multiple subscriptions. What I mean by this is I could go out today to Best Buy and buy QuickBooks Desktop Pro 2020 for around $200. This desktop program you can use for multiple companies and keep it for multiple years. In contrast, QuickBooks Online works a little differently. They charge a monthly subscription. For Online Essentials, it's going to cost around $20 a month. Online Plus, which has more features that are comparable to the desktop version, that's going to cost around $35 a month. These prices do go up and down based on different sales, but that's what they were running the particular day that I pulled them off the internet. So whereas the QuickBooks Desktop, you're spending $200 and can keep it for multiple years and multiple companies, online you're going to be spending somewhere between $240 and $400, and you'll have to have a different subscription for every company. So let's say you have a separate company for crops versus cattle, that's going to cost you 2 QuickBooks Online subscriptions. So it can get more expensive in a hurry. If you are thinking about buying QuickBooks Online, but you're not sure yet, you can actually access a sample company. Just go in and Google QuickBooks Online Test Drive. That's going to give you access to Craig's Design and Landscaping Services. It's just a pretend company. You can go in there and play around and see what the features are and see whether or not you like it before you actually go out and buy the program. If you do decide that's what you want to do, I would recommend some kind of additional training. You can Google QuickBooks Online Ed2Go. That's number 2 under the resources. That's going to give you access to lots of different training modules. Most of them will cost you anywhere from about $75 to $125, just depending on how in depth you go. And I would recommend doing something like that before you go in and try to start putting your own transactions into QuickBooks Online. All right, if you've been using desktop and you want to import your data, you can do that with online. It's very easy to basically upload all your desktop data and dump it into the online version. And like I said, I have mixed feelings about it. The more I work with it, the more comfortable I get, but it does have a very different look and feel. If you look here, this is what the home page for QuickBooks Online looks like. And we can compare that to the homepage of QuickBooks Desktop. The majority of the features are the same between the two programs. It's just the look and the feel and the way you navigate between menus is a lot different. I've used both of them. I still like the desktop better. The online was a huge learning curve for me, but I think either one would work okay, just depending on what type of operation you're dealing with. So now we're going to move on and talk about some basic accounting concepts. So why should you care about accounting definitions and backgrounds before you work with QuickBooks? And the answer is, it's one of the first things you have to do in this program is set up a chart of accounts. And that is really the backbone to your whole system. And as soon as you go in and start creating accounts, they're going to ask you what type. And if you're not familiar with some basic accounting terms, it's going to be really hard to create a good chart of accounts. And as a result, all your transactions, all your reports are going to suffer as well. So when we talk about the different account types in QuickBooks, you're dealing with your profit and loss or income statement accounts. Those are very straightforward. You've got income or revenue, and then you've got expenses or cost. That's really all there is to your income statement accounts. On the other side, you've got your balance sheet accounts. Those are a little more complicated, and they're going to require some definitions. So basically what a balance sheet does is it just provides you a snapshot of your business on any given day. It has three different components. One is your assets. That's what the business owns. That's going to be your land, your equipment, your crops, and your cattle. Another component is your liabilities. That is your debts, what you owe, whether it's a short-term operating note or a long-term, equipment or land note. That's your liabilities. And then the difference is your owner's equity, which is what you're worth. And so when we talk about balancing both sides of an accounting equation, that has to do with your assets, which is what you own, minus your liabilities, which is what you owe, is going to equal your equity, which is basically your net worth, or the difference. Another accounting principle we need to understand is what is the difference between cash versus accrual accounting. Cash is straightforward. It's what a lot of farmers and ranchers do just because that is the way you're required to file your income taxes, is on a cash-based system. Cash, you enter expenses when you pay them, enter income when it's received, and like I said again, it's tax-based. Accrual is a little different. You actually enter a bill when it is received, not when it's paid. Enter income when it is sold, not when you receive the money. And that is more management-oriented. I work with a lot of producers, and the ones that have solely cash-based systems can get themselves in trouble because they'll look and see that they have $200,000 of cash in the bank and they think they have a lot of money. But they don't think about their outstanding bills, and they may have $250,000 in accounts payable that is not really shown on any financial statements, and it can get them in trouble. So what we recommend for most farmers and ranchers is you don't have to go completely accrual, but you don't want to stay completely cash either. So maybe do your cash-based system and incorporate some accrual adjusted entries. That's going to give you a more accurate overall financial picture. Some of the things that we recommend adding is maybe an accounts receivable, an accounts payable, inventories, which, like we talked about earlier, is not great in QuickBooks, but there are ways to get around that. And then if you have any prepaid expenses. One unique feature of QuickBooks is even if you're using accrual adjusted entries, you can still produce cash-based financial statements. So for example, let's pull up an accrual balance sheet. And if you notice here that we've got about $93,000 in accounts receivable, and we want to take those out. And just look at the cash-based entries. So in this example, if you remember on the slide before, we had like $93,000 in accounts receivable. If we were to select cash instead of accrual, that's going to take the vast majority of those out, and we only have a few accounts receivable left. We should have none, so it's not a perfect system. If accounts are overdue or incorrectly entered, then your accounts receivable or on the expense side, your accounts payable might still show up on a cash-based report, but there are several ways to fix that. Like I said, it's not perfect, but it is neat the fact that you can switch back and forth. There are several ways that you can fix this mistake. If you have a good accountant or if you're comfortable with accounting entries, then you can make a general journal entry where you just go in there and you do a debit and a credit and take out that difference. You can also look at previous entries and try to figure out if you made a mistake somewhere and that's why your accounts receivable is showing up. Or if you're in a hurry and you just want a quick fix, you can actually export this balance sheet or any other financial report to Excel. I really like this feature and it's relatively easy to do. All you have to do is to pull up whatever financial report that you want to export. Up at the top, you'll see an arrow that says Excel. Click on that and then click on Create New Worksheet. And that will take you directly into the Excel program. And once you're in Excel, then you can isolate whatever transaction that you want to correct. So in this example, we're going to see accounts receivable. That doesn't really need to be on there when we take this balance sheet to our banker. We're doing a cash-based system, not an accrual-based. You would just go in there and delete those two lines, recalculate everything, and then you would have a balance sheet without your accounts receivable. It would still be in QuickBooks, but it wouldn't be in the balance sheet that you printed for your banker or your accountant. This is a useful tool, not just for accounts receivable, but you can also do inventory and depreciation adjustments, customize your reports. There's lots of different options. As I mentioned before, QuickBooks does not have a real great inventory feature when you're dealing with raised crops. So we recommend maybe keeping inventory outside of QuickBooks in Excel or some other program. And then when you need to have it indicated or reflected in your financial statements, export your balance sheet to Excel, add the inventory, and then give it to whatever relevant party wants it. In this second section, I want to focus on some of the unique features in QuickBooks that are useful to farmers and ranchers. First one I want to cover are QuickBooks classes. Classes are most often used as enterprise codes to match transactions with specific farm commodities rather than the business as a whole. A lot of people aren't real familiar with classes. Farmers tend to use more sub-accounts, but I'm going to show you here with some examples how classes are usually the preferred method. So let's say we want to know in the year 2020 whether or not our corn, our cotton, our sorghum, or our wheat made the most money. If we were to use the sub-account method, in this example, I'm going to say that we owe Equity Co-op $20,000. And if you look at the bottom under your accounts, $5,000 of that went to corn chemicals, $7,000 went to cottonseed, and $8,000 went to fertilizer for sorghum. If we're to use the sub-account method, what we would have to do is under every single production expense, we would have to have 4 sub-accounts. So chemicals would have to have corn, cotton, sorghum, wheat, fertilizer, corn, cotton, sorghum, wheat, and so on and so forth. That can really jumble up your chart of accounts in a hurry. So the better method might be to take this check and do it through the class system. And the way the class system works is you just have to go up to list and class list. You would create a class for the year 2020 for wheat, sorghum, cotton, and corn. Why they're in a different order with classes and sub-accounts, I have no idea. That's QuickBooks magic. I don't know how to fix it. But anyway, the same 4 crops are in there. And then if you look at the bottom, it shows chemicals for $5,000 that are tied to the corn class, seed for $7,000 that's tied to the cotton class, and fertilizer for $8,000 that's tied to the sorghum class. We don't have to mess with sub-accounts here. We just have one set of classes for 4 crops, and you tie them to whatever production expense is the most relevant. You can also use classes when you're dealing with any kind of income. If you've got a deposit and you know that money needs to go to corn income or cotton income, you can do it through the deposit slips. You can assign classes in invoicing, in billing, any type of transaction you do in QuickBooks, you can assign a class to. I mentioned before that one advantage of classes is that it keeps your chart of accounts a lot cleaner. Another advantage is if you get used to this system and use it in your everyday transactions, you record a deposit and assign some classes to it, you write checks or enter bills, you assign classes, then at the end of the year, you can print out a profit and loss by class report. And that's going to give you a really good picture of all the income tied to a particular commodity and their relevant expenses. In this example, we had crops. And so we can look, and at first glance, it looks like cotton made a lot of money, $305,000 versus $180,000. But if we also look at the expenses, they're higher with cotton. So the net income, cotton only makes about $15,000 more than sorghum, rather than the $125,000 more that it looks like in the income. So this is a really neat tool that you can use for enterprise budgeting. And in this example, I'm using crops, but it's just as effective for cattle. I have guys that have a raised cattle class and a purchased cattle class, or maybe you do some custom work, you want to have a custom work class. The way you develop these are really only limited by your imagination and then what you actually want it to reflect in your farm or ranch. One final note, I try to always make sure that the parent class is the year. The reason for that is that so many of our crops and cattle will go across the calendar year. I'll have producers in Texas Panhandle that they'll harvest their 2020 cotton in December, but they won't sell it until January or February of 2021. And so we want to make sure that our enterprise budgets are tied to the growing season and not the calendar year. And you can fix that by making the year the parent class. The last thing to note about classes is that when you create a new company, this feature is not even turned on. And this really bugs me because it's a great feature. It's really a great way to do enterprise budgeting, yet you don't even know it exists unless you've learned about it somewhere else. And so if you start a new company, or even if you're working in your current company, there's an easy way to check to see if class tracking is turned on. Just go to Edit and Preferences on your top menu. Go to the Accounting window and select Company Preferences. And then you'll be able to see if the Use Class Tracking box is checked or unchecked. If it's unchecked, then you'll need to make sure you check it before you go in and try to start creating these classes. Next, I want to talk about planning and budgeting in QuickBooks. QuickBooks has a really cool budgeting feature, especially if you have at least 1 year of actual data. It's easy to get to. You'll just go up to Company in your drop-down menu, select Planning and Budgeting, and then Set Up Budgets. From there, you'll select to create a new budget, choose the year that you want to project, and then decide whether or not you want to create a profit and loss or balance sheet budget. We're going to select profit and loss just because that is the most commonly requested one from bankers when you try to get your operating note renewed. You can also specify whether you want any additional criteria reflected in the budgets like customer and job or classes. We're just going to leave that blank for now. Finally, choose if you want to create the budget from scratch or from the previous year's actual data. If you have last year's data and you can use that method, that's going to be the preferred choice just because it will make projecting forward a whole lot easier. By using last year's actual data, when QuickBooks makes a budget for, let's say, 2021, they will take those numbers, show it as your annual total, and then break out the income and expense that you received by month in the previous year, and you can use that to project forward. And as you look at those totals, then you can decide whether or not you think those amounts need to be higher or lower. And so you can do that by clicking on the Adjust Row Amounts. And in this example, fuel was running about $1,700 last year. Obviously, that's way too low for a farming or ranching operation. That's just what we had in a sample report. But I can go in and say I want to adjust the row amounts and decrease every monthly amount by 15% starting the first month. Or maybe you think it's going to be higher, you can increase it by 15%. Or if you don't want to mess with percentages, you can choose to increase or decrease each month by a certain dollar amount. It's an easy way to take your numbers from last year and with very little effort create a good budget that looks forward. Once you get a good budget created, then you can regularly check whether or not you're over or under those projections by pulling up a budget versus actual report. This is a great tool, keeps you honest, keeps you on track. It can reassure your banker that you're actually spending really whatever you expected to spend at any given time. These reports, it'll just show up what you budgeted and then both the dollar amount and the percentage of what you're over or under. The final section I want to cover relates to QuickBooks Payroll. One question I often get asked is QuickBooks even good for payroll? And the short answer is yes. It can be ideal for agriculture operations and any other small business because of its flexibility and variety. No small farm or ranch is the same, so when it comes to payroll, there's really many different needs that a provider should be able to meet. Depending on the budget and company size, QuickBooks has several options available. The easiest way to see what payroll services are out there and how much QuickBooks charges is from the desktop home screen, just click on Turn on Payroll. This will automatically take you online and show the 3 payroll services available. The basic option costs about $17 a month plus $2 per employee. The Enhance is the most popular one. It's the one that I like the best just because you can electronically file your W-2s at the year end. That's going to cost a little over $26 a month plus $2 per employee per month. The QuickBooks Assisted Payroll is much more comprehensive. Basically, somebody from the QuickBooks agency will do a lot of the payroll for you. That's obviously the most expensive. That's $54.50 a month plus an extra $2 per employee per pay cycle. I'm not a big fan of the QuickBooks Assisted just because there's a high likelihood you're going to have somebody assisting with your payroll that has never had anything to do with farming and ranching or agriculture. There's some rules in farming and ranching that don't apply to other businesses, and that could get you in trouble if you select that assisted payroll service. And just the last thing to note is up until the 2020 version, I've been able to figure out how to set up QuickBooks manually where you don't have to pay for a service. They've pretty well taken that option out. So if you choose to do QuickBooks Payroll, you're going to have to pay for it in some form or fashion. Once you select and enable a payroll service, then you will go to the Payroll Setup menu to get everything started. The Payroll Setup interview will guide you through setting up everything you need to run payroll and pay employees, from employee information, if they have an I-9 number, anything else like that. If you need to do child support garnishments, you can set that up. payroll taxes, and any common compensation and benefit items. Payroll setup is easy, and the interview helps you each step of the way. It will take about 20 minutes to an hour. It's a very step-by-step process. You start out by setting up the company. You'll have to put in your EIN number, many other things like that. From an employee standpoint, you'll have to decide, is it a 1099 employee, a W-2 employee, and then you'll just go through the entire process. Very comprehensive, but a good way to get started in QuickBooks Payroll. Once you've completed the payroll interview, then you will use the Payroll Center to manage all your activities and complete any kind of day-to-day transactions. The Payroll Center has several different features. The Pay Employee tab will allow you to pay your employees by free direct deposit or by check. It makes it very easy. You enter the hours and then QuickBooks will do all the tax math. The Pay Liabilities tab, you can see where your tax liabilities, when your tax liabilities are due and how much you owe, and you can also pay them electronically from QuickBooks, or you can print and mail the check. And then finally, from the File Forms tab, you can file federal and most state tax forms. QuickBooks will fill in the information. All you have to do is review and either file electronically from QuickBooks, or you can print and mail them. And that is one of the neat things about the QuickBooks Payroll, is that it does so much of the work for you. Just an example, if I click on Start Schedule Payroll, and you look at this paycheck, all you have to do is enter the hours. QuickBooks will automatically, based on your payroll items that you set up, calculate how much you're going to pay them, what your overtime rate is, if they have any sick or hourly, all that's going to be automatically included. And then even more importantly, they're going to automatically fill out all your tax tables. So as long as you do your payroll interview correctly and set up all your items and your tax information, QuickBooks is going to make it a whole lot easier from then on out. In conclusion, QuickBooks is a strong financial accounting program that can be adapted for agricultural use. By learning QuickBooks, farmers and ranchers can increase their financial analysis capabilities, which helps them make better production, financial, and marketing decisions. And then also developing good financial statements through QuickBooks helps improve the relationship with local lenders and accountants, and overall gives you a higher likelihood of getting an operating note renewed. Thanks for listening to my presentation, and if I can provide further assistance to anyone that's interested in learning more about financial accounting or QuickBooks, feel free to give me a call. My cell phone number is 806-681-5145.